Dave Palumbo here with another RX Muscle Rant. Today's topic is going to be what are the best blood pressure medications that you can use to control blood pressure and to act preventatively to protect your kidneys, cardiovascular system, and brain, obviously. We don't want to have high blood pressure. We know that high blood pressure can be from several different sources. It can be from holding a lot of extracellular water, retaining fluid, in other words, which adds more volume to your blood system, which increases the pressure. It could be a genetic thing. I never had a high blood pressure early in my 20s when I was in my mid to late 20s when I was the biggest I was. I got it later in my early 30s. I started getting slightly high blood pressure, and I think that was just a genetic thing because what happens is the blood vessel walls become a little stiffer. As you get older, they lose their compliance of being able to expand and contract as much, and sometimes you get higher blood pressures because of that. And if you have a family predisposition to high blood pressure, you tend to follow the family tree, unfortunately. These are things that you need to identify. There's several things that I always tell people to keep an eye on now. I wish I knew this when I was competing. Blood pressure, blood sugars. Now that we have glucometers that are super cheap to get, you can test your blood sugars. But blood pressure is very important. Kidney health, specifically, obviously heart health and brain health. Too much high blood pressure obviously puts a strain on the heart. It makes the chambers enlarge. Too much pressure on the brain can cause aneurysms and all kinds of crazy stroke and stuff like that later in life. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to damage the blood vessels by putting tremendous pressure on them. Kidneys obviously is the most important, especially since bodybuilders eat a lot of protein, okay? We're constantly consuming food, so the kidneys are constantly filtering the blood at a much higher rate, okay, than the average person who eats 3 times a day. And because of that, you add high blood pressure on top of that, and you're really, really taxing those kidneys, and so that could be a problem. So high, protein intake is not an issue for the kidneys, assuming that the blood pressure is normal and that you're hydrating enough. And that's things that you have to understand. I think people think, well, if you eat high protein, that's bad for your kidneys. No. If you have kidney problems, however, and the kidneys can't handle, are not working at a maximum efficiency, obviously eating a super high protein diet is not going to be good for your kidneys because they just can't keep up with the workload of deaminating the amino acids and cleansing the blood. So that's why you would cut back protein intake if your kidney function is not good. But it's not, the high protein itself doesn't cause the kidney problems. The high blood pressure does. And why is that? Because you have this constant smashing of high pressure on the kidney filtering apparatuses in the kidney or apparati, and then they get damaged. And when they get damaged, sometimes they just become non-functional. Sometimes they scar over and become sclerotic or fibrotic. They don't function. And you have a lot of those things down there, but the more you kill off and damage, eventually you run out of them. And your efficiency starts decreasing, and that's why your creatinine will start to creep up and up and up because you're not able to filter the blood adequately. So a lot of us, myself probably included, have over the years that probably have done some damage to our kidneys, I'm sure, just from this crazy super high protein diets. I'm sure at one point or another I had high blood pressure and didn't know about it. I discovered when I was about 33, 34 that I was running some high blood pressures, and I started taking blood pressure meds. The question is, what blood pressure meds are the best? There's different ways to deal with blood pressure. I've seen people be put on what's called beta blockers. With beta blockers will slow the heart rate down. So the heart has receptors on them known as beta 1 receptors, and if you block those beta 1 receptors, it slows the heart down. So if the heart doesn't beat as fast, you're not going to have your pressure is going to go down a little bit. But I find that beta blockers really don't control blood pressure very well. I think they're more appropriate to prescribe beta blockers if you have, say, arrhythmias, meaning that your heart can beat out of control too fast, it can go into a flutter, because what beta blockers will do is prevent that arrhythmia from happening because it keeps the heart from going crazy like that. It lowers heart rate. For guys who train real hard, you're not being able to raise your heart rate up, is probably not the best idea because if you're doing a set of high intensity squats or deadlifts, you're going to get lightheaded because you're not going to be able to pump enough blood to your muscles. So that I never found that was a good way to deal with it. Once again, if you have an arrhythmia, different story. If you're just trying to control blood pressure, to me, beta blockers are a bad way to do that. There's also obviously prescription diuretics that a lot of people, older people, get prescribed. Diazide, Lasix, being stronger than diazide. And that's to flush extra fluid out of the body. because sometimes the body starts retaining fluid because the heart is not pumping efficiently and the circulation is not happening correctly. And by taking that diuretic, it gets rid of the extra fluid that might be backing up in the lungs, per se, and it will lower blood pressure, okay, and make the person feel better. For most bodybuilders or people who are working out, who are running slightly high blood pressures, that's probably not a good thing to do either, because that's really not the problem. The problem is that they're just running high blood pressures. They're really not backing up fluid. And by giving a diuretic to someone who trains intensely, you're also compromising electrolytes. So you're lowering the sodium and potentially the potassium as well in the body, depending on which diuretic you use. And that can cause muscle cramping and it can cause all kinds of other side effects. So for bodybuilders on a regular basis, a prescription diuretic is not the first line of defense that I would employ. It's probably for someone who has an uncontrolled case of high blood pressure. For the introductory, hey, I just found out I have high blood pressure, or maybe I'm borderline and I want to protect my kidneys, there's two choices. There's what we call ACE inhibitors, and then there's angiotensin receptor blockers, okay? ACE inhibitors kind of, inhibit the production of angiotensin, so they're kind of a step ahead, and then the angiotensin receptor blockers will just block the receptor. They both accomplish the exact same thing, and they're both pretty side effect free. Some people get sometimes a little bit of a dry cough from one or the other, but I haven't had any problems I've tried both, and I like the ACE inhibitors the best. Initially when I first started taking it, I had a little bit of a dry cough once in a while, and it went away after a couple weeks. I don't notice it at all. I don't even know that I'm on them, to be honest with you. But I've tried to come off the ACE inhibitor just to see what my blood pressure would be, because I'm like much lighter now, and it does creep up. So I'm like, you know what? I obviously need it, and I do very well, and I'm very controlled blood pressures on the ACE inhibitor I use. I use Ramipril, 5 milligrams twice a day. There's Lisinopril, which is like a kind of a generic form of it that's a little cheaper than the Ramipril. I have an insurance plan. I don't really care. I've been using Ramipril. I have good results, so I don't change it up. But if I'm in the hospital or I have my shoulders done, they don't give you Ramipril. They'll give you Lisinopril because it kind of does the same thing. And my blood pressures were actually low on that as well. So I don't really worry about it. I know other people who use like Valsartan, which is an angiotensin receptor blocker, works similarly but blocks the receptor for angiotensin. And by doing that, the blood pressure seems to have the same amount of control. Now, I read an article to see if you mix one ACE inhibitor with an angiotensin receptor blocker, if you get better results, and they showed statistically that there's no better control of the blood pressure. So one or the other is the choice, and what you use is up to you. There's different schools of thought of what works better and which is better. I talk to my cardiologist about this all the time. He's a bodybuilder too, and he seems to think he uses an ACE inhibitor like I do, and he's been using it for years like I have, and he feels like his blood pressure is controlled really well with them, and I happen to agree with him. I had asked him if, was it worth changing, since I know a lot of the angiotensin receptor blockers that are out now are newer, and he said really, this because he's a statistics guy, he's like, statistically, the ACE inhibitors seem to control blood pressure really, really well. And there's no statistical significance. And he said, if you have no side effects from taking it and you don't even know you're on it, why switch? And you know what? He's right. So, you got to figure out what works well for you. Now, there's something else called calcium channel blockers. And I found that, originally one of my original doctors wanted to put me on that, but I did a lot of research and I found that a lot of guys have like fluid retention in their legs because of that. And I just felt like, calcium channel blocking really is probably not the best thing to do for bodybuilders who need calcium for muscle contraction. It just didn't sound like the right way to control blood pressure. So I stuck with the ACE inhibitor, and that's what I would recommend that you guys do, either an ACE inhibitor or an angiotensin receptor blocker. If you can control blood pressure with that and be in the normal low range, I think that's the way to go. Hopefully, you don't have to go to something else or add a prescription diuretic in there as well, because like I said, for some people, they have uncontrolled high blood pressure, and no matter how much ACE inhibitor or angiotensin receptor blocker they take, they're still running high, and they need to add something else in on top of that. Obviously, if you have arrhythmias or anything like that, the beta blocker would be added on top of that. So once again, work with a cardiologist. Try to find a cardiologist that actually understands, working out and the athlete, because if not, they may prescribe something to you that's not going to be in your best interest as a guy who actually works out really intensely in the gym, like a calcium channel blocker or a beta blocker. And that's something that you have to have a good line of communication in. And if you don't, find a cardiologist that you can vibe with and that you get, have a good rapport with, I would say switch. I know people, if you guys reach out to me in New York, I have some good guys. Obviously down here in Florida, I've hooked up with a really, really good guy as well. If anyone wants any referrals, I'll be happy to help you out if I can. But I know that there's a lot of cardiologists out there that do work out and that are into that and understand the athlete from that perspective, and that's what you really need to look for. Once again, you're protecting yourself long term. Remember, they call high blood pressure, okay, it's known as the you don't even know you have it disease, type of thing. It's the silent killer because you don't really know you have high blood pressure until the damage has been done. So don't walk around with your head in the sand. Go buy a blood pressure cuff, measure your blood pressure throughout the day. If you are running high, go see your cardiologist. Let them do a workup on you and say, you know what, yeah, you need one or no, you don't. If you do, there's nothing wrong with it. It's very protective as a bodybuilder to take a mild blood pressure medication to prevent future complications. All right, I'm Dave Palumbo with an RX Muscle Rant.